Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here. Now, before today's video, I'm just going to quickly just mention that I have started a Buy Me a Coffee account. It was just because some of you guys were asking about further supporting the channel through donations, and I'm obviously quite happily open to that. If you can't donate, don't worry. I'm not going to be putting any exclusive content on there anytime soon. It's all just, if you want to support the channel further, that option is now there if you'd like to use it. If you can't for whatever reason or don't want to, that's fine. Just keep watching my videos. That's really the best way you guys can support me. And with that, we'll get on to today's video. So today I'm going to discuss the idea of Marines in Star Trek. Well, less that so much, because I did a recording for that, and frankly, it was awful because I just ended up saying, oh, why don't they have Starfleet Marines? They should have Starfleet Marines. Why don't they have Starfleet Marines? It's crazy, right? It's kind of like, everyone's already kind of said that, and I'm like, don't really want to have to say, don't think I could add to that specific part of the conversation. Because actually, no one has Marines, sort of in the traditional sense. There's no specific Marine force. And so really, I think it's not really fair to judge Starfleet by today's standards of the 21st century. I think it's much better to judge them by their own standards of the 24th century. So let's do that. Let's see what's kind of there in terms of ground troops or Marines in the 24th century. We'll start with really the first group who very early on have kind of got it sussed and knock it out of the park, and that's the Klingons. They have a very good idea of what they want their infantry to do, and for their style of fighting it works very well. Klingons are very much in favour of this kind of maneuver style warfare. They're very, very quick moving, very aggressive, very fast and hard hitting, but overall, they don't have a huge amount of bulk, slug it out ships. Everything in their fleet is relatively fast, and I think the same applies really to their approach to ground troops. If you look at their boarding parties in Way of the Warrior, they're about 4 to 6 warriors, and they're very lightly equipped. They've got maybe a disruptor pistol, maybe a carbine, and a hand weapon of some kind, be that a batleth or the shorter mechleth or whatever. But they have something, they've got a real mixed variation of good variety. They're also very lightly armoured. They have armour, but it is light. It doesn't encumber them too much. And they're kind of sort of very autonomous. I feel like the only order they're given is just keep going, keep moving. Once you're inside the enemy ship, just keep moving, keep going, and keep disrupting them. Don't try to sort of create a front or anything like that. Just keep moving. It's sort of that blitzkrieg. And then I think really you apply that same doctrine for them. I think they'd apply that same doctrine on the ground. They could probably even be delivered, say transporters are out, or transporters frankly are boring. You don't even need a shuttle with the Klingons. They just have their birds of prey. Those sweep into atmosphere. They have a landing ramp, Burrell class. Out you come with the back. In Star Trek Into Darkness, and I know it's JJ Verse and Heresy and all that, but there's that scene where they're in Kronos, and you have the Klingons swinging in, rappelling in from the birds of prey. I thought that was really cool, and I think, again, that's kind of something the Klingons would definitely do in the 24th century, so I think that's a very good idea, and I think that's kind of works with this idea of being very fast, very maneuverable, very flexible, and really it works for the Klingons. Anything that's too heavily fortified, they'll just go around it anyway. You just go around it and you wait for the siege equipment to show up, be that orbital or suborbital. So do the Klingons really have, big, heavy equipment for the ground? Probably not. They really don't have much in the way of siege-capable ships either. Really, it's the Negvar, and that's it. And that's only if they've equipped them with the siege disruptors. Otherwise, Klingon fleets are kind of optimized to just keep going, keep on powering forward. And I think, the same really applies to their ground troops. And it works with that whole thing. They have a very loose command structure. There's a lot of freedom. Your only order really is just keep moving. So next on the list, I suppose, would be the Cardassians. I kind of, obviously, I'm talking about them a lot in battle space right now. What we do see with the Cardassians is they are organized into orders. Now, we do kind of know what these orders are. They seem to be like large formation army groups, but they also seem to be naval because Gul Dukat is a naval officer as well as being part of the Second Order. So that to me suggests that they're these joint infantry naval fighting force, and essentially they're a self-contained army. People were talking about how really the organization for the Cardassians is geared towards occupation, and I think they're right. I think the idea is it's this whole top-down command structure that's there, and it's very defensive in mindset, i.e. it's like you're assigned here and your infantry is assigned here, and you have to kind of keep that. There's not really that room to allow for freedom of movement, whereas like with the Klingons there is. You bring your infantry with you. Your infantry is also your fighting crew, and really in terms of needing to support each other, it's much more easy to manage for the Klingons than it is for the Cardassians that are just, this order goes here, this ground detachment goes here, and this naval detachment has to support it, so it has to be here. So that there's less flexibility, because I think they have this very top-down command structure, and I don't think there's a huge amount of freedom or autonomy for Cardassian officers. So the infantry ends up being just kind of this occupation force and ends up sort of generally digging in rather than being very mobile and aggressive. Really, that then comes on to the Dominion. It's kind of a similar thing, except with a slightly more aggressive, offensive mindset, simply because you look at the Cardassian infantry, they're pretty boggo standard. The Jem'hadar have got bayonets. No one else has bayonets. Even the Klingons don't have bayonets on their weapons, but the Jem'hadar do. And I think, again, that kind of speaks to this organization, which is basically the Vorta are going to say, go here. And yes, okay, there is some autonomy within it. You have your second and third and the first, all kind of delegating orders and the like. But for the most part, it's really expected that they will be receiving detailed orders from a Vorta. And so the Vorta's orders are generally going to be, go to this, take this position, okay, now defend this position. And that's really all there is to it for the Jem'hadar. In terms of whether or not there's a kind of organizational difference, I don't really think so. There's probably more of a difference in terms of which Vorta are assigned to ground assignments and which ones are assigned to space, but I think in terms of the Jem'hadar, it's kind of inconsequential. I think they will have the basic skill set, because even then, space Jem'hadar are still going to be expected to board ships, so you may as well just have them as a universal. I don't think there are like specific differences between the Jem'hadar you'll find piloting ships and the Jem'hadar that will be leading ground attacks. Interestingly, the Jem'hadar fighter has the same provision as the Klingon bird of prey for delivering troops to the surface. So again, there is that sort of mobility, but the way the command structure works means that it is there's far less freedom and autonomy for individual officers. So that then brings us to the Romulans, and we don't really know a lot about the Romulans. We don't even hear much about Romulan infantry. So this is largely my opinion and based off research I've done for Wings. Essentially, you have the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Legions. There is some sort of overlap and joint work, but bear in mind the Romulans are quite defensive, and the Navy is the primary instrument of their defense. It's think Romulan occupation operates very differently. I think for the most part, a Romulan occupied world is kind of self-governing, so that you'll just like appoint a leader from among that species or a species from a neighbouring world, much like the Romans did in their empire, and have them run things and see to that security. The Romulan armies, the Imperial Legion's only going to be called in a final resort. But I think there is this kind of, if the kind of doctrine that defines Romulan warships is to anything to be gone by, to go by, then they're going to have some pretty serious ground equipment. I think they're going to be using, I think the Romulan Imperial Legion will be using a lot of force multipliers. Again, because they're a professional force, much like Starfleet. So they're going to use a lot of force multipliers. They'll be using tanks, shuttles, and other aircraft, and fighters and the like. And they're really going to be using that to put pressure on the enemy. So that's really the Romulans, and I think they kind of doctrinally are kind of more about that conventional fighting, but it's the way you do it. It's not about sort of charging the enemy and smashing through like it is with the Klingons, and it's not like with the Cardassians where it's very much about standing your ground and sort of playing your part as a larger whole. I think for the Romulans it's a lot about deception, maneuver, and not quite maneuver, but deception and trap. It's the Romulans have the capacity, have demonstrated repeatedly, to have impressive amounts of firepower available, but they don't brute force it. Instead, what they generally do is bait you into a position where you're vulnerable. And I think really that's kind of how the Romulans would operate on the ground, is they're going to kind of draw you into suddenly finding yourself out of depth against a more powerful force multiplier like a tank. I haven't really seen any. I've seen 2 bits of fan art regarding tanks, one Klingon, one Federation. Not seen any for Romulans, but I think they definitely would use them, or some kind of aircraft, like gunship sort of thing. They definitely would. But at the same time, also with the Romulan army, or the Romulan Imperial Legion, it's a separate organisation, so there's kind of a bit of compromise. The Navy can't move that fast. Now that's fine, because the Navy's not moving that fast. They're big ships, they're very slow, and when you've got a cloaking device, you don't need speed. And that really contrasts with the Klingon approach, where they like having the cloaking device and the speed. Whereas for the Romulan, I think they also look at the cloaking device in a more strategic way, and that allows them for a greater kind of use of deception rather than requiring speed. But it means that, unlike the Klingons, where you may have a attack force blow past you, of lightly armed troops, and you could be waiting a very, very long time for the main force to show up with the siege equipment. I think with the Romulans, the army shows up, the Legion shows up quite soon after, because of organization and because the Navy can't really move that fast anyway. So those first assault troops are going to be quickly followed by the Imperial Legion. So now we come to Starfleet. And with Starfleet, I think it's a case of, at the end of the Romulan Earth War and the formation of the Federation, you have Mako and you have the Imperial Guard by the Andorids, and that's all folded into Starfleet security. And I think we can say definitely, for the most part, for at least the first 100 years, it's pretty firmly entrenched. If you look at the Federation in Discovery, the security equipment available, I know people don't like Discovery, but actually I think most of the Federation stuff is fine. I think the phaser, you look at the phaser rifle, they've got a standard issue phaser rifle and it's good. They've got body armor. They've got all this stuff that really is very effective. And, secure. So that's all folded into Starfleet security, and Starfleet security remains fairly military for the most part. Really, if you look at it, particularly with the original series films, it's the original series that is really the blip, that is really the kind of the odd one out, because yes, they're the red shirts in that. Whereas in the films, again, we see they have proper body armor. They don't have a service rifle, but they have body armor, and they look much more military. And maybe that was a sign because of the increasing tensions during the 2270s and 80s of increasing tension with the Klingons. So that is quite possible. And then they kind of drop it as you get into the 24th century, and that's kind of when. And then so by the time Next Generation, I think I would say that a security officer from early Next Generation would not stand his ground if bayonet charged by a Jem'hadar, and I think they would, well, they visibly did by the time of Deep Space Nine, and I think the reason is is because Starfleet security is able to change its training, and I think that's probably what it does. Its whole point is that it's not necessarily a defined marine force, but it is a flexible response security force that is kind of ever adapting, evolving, and changing. But the downside is any time a threat crops up, they're going to be behind the curve, much like the US was going into the Second World War, where they're completely unprepared for it. By the end of it, they've got an army that is very well suited to fighting it, but at the start, they were way, way, way behind everyone else. So that's kind of where the Federation stands with the use of its infantry and Marines. Is that you do have them, they're just Starfleet security. And it's really just a case of what is in fashion with the training at that time. And then, what events are going to shape that and how it develops. That's all for now. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.